Hello. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for thank you for joining us for today's seminar, part of the Carleton University Disability Research Group series, Accessibility, Inclusion, and Disability, Connecting Scholars and Practitioners. I'm Ryan Patterson with the CUDRG and the Carleton Accessibility Institute and the Toronto Metropolitan University School of Disability Studies. I'm a white man, glasses, brown parted hair, short brown beard, no mustache, white collared shirt. We're also joined by my series co-organizer, Professor Dominique Marshall, a wonderful online audience, and three highly knowledgeable speakers to celebrate Wendell Nicholas's life, work, and legacy: Melinda Martin, Wasueg Nicholas, and Ann Seymour. While the seminar itself is virtual, we acknowledge that Carleton University campus is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Wabanaki Nation, and I'm coming to you right now from the Dish with One Spoon Treaty Territory. We acknowledge our responsibility and express our appreciation to both groups and to the Tobique First Nation in which Wendell was raised. Please note that we have muted all of you and that until the discussion portion of the seminar, and that this event is being recorded. So as I pass to Ann to begin, please join me. You know what, your cameras are off, you don't have to. I was going to say, please join me visually. I hope we're all joining in welcoming both of our speakers. You can use a little clap emoji. And Ann, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for the introduction and acknowledging that you are in Algonquin territory. My name is Ann Seymour. I am an Ojibwe. I am right now currently sitting in the community of Akwesasne territory, and I'm a guest here as an Ojibwe, living and working within the Haudenosaunee communities. So I'm happy to be here today to welcome Wasueg and Melinda, Wendell's widow and Wendell's daughter. So it gives me a great honor to be here. I am a fourth year PhD student. I'm in the Faculty of Public Affairs at Carleton University. I am a social worker by background. I've been doing frontline social work for approximately 35 years. And most recently, my focus on social work has been focusing on mental health. My research right now is, my research study is being supervised by Kim Matheson, who is in the Department of Neuroscience. And right now, my research study focuses on the land. As a social worker, it's important to me in regard to looking at mental health and the advocacy of Indigenous peoples, and it's very important to me, including the topic that we're here today to talk about people with disabilities, specifically Indigenous people, and the legacy that Wendell has left behind. So my research question looks at what does the land mean? And essentially, how does the land promote healing specifically for Indigenous peoples? My research is in the community of Akwesasne, and so therefore I am doing community-based participatory research, and my research is within the community of Akwesasne, like I said. I am a participant. I worked with Dominique previously with the Oral Histories of Disability Research Project when I was a when I was a PhD student in year 3. And I'm happy to be here as an oral historian to continue this important work with Dominique. So with that, that's me in a nutshell. It gives me a great honor and a pleasure to introduce Melinda Martin and Wasueg. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Wasueg and Melinda. Wasueg, it would be great if I could hear you introduce yourself first, and then followed by Mom.
My name is Wasueg Nicholas. I'm the daughter of Wendell Nicholas. That's it. I don't know. Okay. I'm Melinda Martin. I was married to Wendell Nicholas since 1996, and we're coming to you from the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq, and we're in the community of Listugush, unceded territory. Yeah, that's it for now, I guess.
Thank you, Wasueg, and thank you, Melinda. I would like the audience to know that Wasueg and Melinda and I, we did join in a previous conversation over a webinar that is posted on the Carleton University Research CUDREG. Is that right, Dominique? And so that video is posted there. And so what I'd like to do is to continue the conversations that we had, Melinda and Wasueg. It's important for us today in the audience to learn more about Wendell and the legacy that he's left behind. As an Indigenous person growing up in Tobique, it's important to expand on, can you tell us a little bit more about Wendell and his role within the community, and what did that look like? What does that look like when Wendell was here in the work that he was doing?
Wendell, he I don't know how far back do you want me to start as far as his work with the community. As a person who was legally blind, he went to school. He started his elementary school in Tobique. I had mentioned to you before that they were encouraging him to go to a school for the blind, and his parents, especially his mother, pushed the fact that he shouldn't be he should be integrated with kids in his community, and they would figure out whatever he needed in order for him to stay there and to be educated alongside his cousins, his siblings, and that's what they did. And so he had a very close relationship with his family, and they were education was very important, especially on his paternal his father's side of the family. His paternal grandmother, made sure all of them went through high school and all got post-secondary education. And she pushed Wendell to be involved, to take a leadership role. And I mean, when he was a teenager, his first acts of advocacy, I would say, was when he helped write letters. He helped the veterans that were looking to get benefits. Either they didn't apply, or they got lost in the paperwork somehow. He was able to help them write letters and get benefits. And so that was one of his first acts, I guess, as advocacy for somebody other than himself. And that was just a start. I mean, later on, his father was involved with the repatriation of the Constitution to Canada. And so he was making sure, so his father, Chief Dennis Nicholas at the time, was trying to make sure that rights of Aboriginal people were safeguarded somehow. And today it looks like the section, it looks like it's entrenched in the Constitution. But that, for him to make sure before it left Britain to come to Canada, he was working there. And so Wendell got to see London, and he got to see Paris. I mean, so it just kind of opened up his world, sort of thing, to be. I think he went to school there for maybe 6 months, not quite a year, and but that did really impress upon him the importance of lobbying, the understanding how the Constitution works, and how I mean, that was the things that he got to see at his father's elbow, sort of thing. And everybody has a little role in that, and and how that worked. And it was just I think it was an insight for Wendell to tackle a subject, or an issue within the system, like to somehow change, make change. I think that's so. I mean, those who I think were really instrumental in getting him to be the way he was, and that was always a helper. And you could ask anybody in his community today that there's so many people that he helped, whether it was somebody whose child was was going into care, or somebody who that needed help. There's so many examples that people getting disability benefits, just even learning how to advocate for your child. He was always there to help somebody. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing all that, Melinda. That's really a lot of information, and it speaks to Wendell's legacy in regards to his advocacy and stepping up to have a voice for community. So that's really important. So I appreciate you sharing that. Wasueg, is there anything you want to add to what Mom had said about Dad's background? I know that you yourself have taken on a role of activism for the young people, Indigenous people in the community. Did you have anything to add to that?
Not really. She kind of summed it all up.
How about yourself? Like, I know that you had went with your father. I know that your father had passed at a young age, but you also went with him and you traveled with Dad quite often. And with you in this advocacy role with young people and Indigenous people with mental health, do you think there was something that Dad would have prompted you to carry on in regards to Dad would, like Mom had said, Dad would be writing letters, and he would have the advocacy for veterans. Like, did some of that wear off onto you? Is that something that you saw in Dad? Like, what are some of those important things that Dad had passed down to you?
There's quite a few things that my dad had kind of done that I've kind of seen, and I was like, oh, I want to do that. Like when he had gone to conferences and meetings and all that, he would talk in front of big groups of people and he would talk about what he was doing, and people would be just so like shocked, and they'd be like, wow, he knows what he's talking about. And I was like, that's how I want to be. And I was like, I want to be able to follow into that and be able to talk to people how he did and touch people how he did. Like he would talk to people, and I can't remember how many times that he would be talking to someone and everyone would get emotional, and then he would get emotional and the person would get emotional. And there's a lot of like vulnerability to be there with someone and get emotional with somebody and be able to talk to someone the way that he could talk to people. And it was just really like, I don't know, there were just so many moments that were just so touching and that kind of like stick with you. Like it really, like you see that and you're like, that's something that I want to be able to do for my people, how my dad did it for our people.
It's awesome. Thank you, Wasueg. Thank you for sharing. I think when we think about Wendell and all his work that he did with the community, not only in the community itself, but on a provincial level, on an international level, we have Wendell traveling all across the globe to ensure that we have people with disability to have a voice. Now, Wendell himself did not use the word disability a lot, and he did not believe, he was a person that did not believe he had a disability. Although he was legally blind, I worked with Wendell at AFN. I worked with him and Mike Mitchell at the cross-border issues, and you can see Wendell all over the place. And this is a person that's legally blind, navigating the systems, navigating the conferences, and so he was all over. I'm wondering if you could speak to his work and his motivation, and in regards to, like, his mom didn't put him into a regular school. I mean, didn't want to put him into a school for people with blindness. Mom wanted him in a school with his siblings. And so then he starts letter writing. My question is, he doesn't see himself as a person with disability, but rather he'd rather look at inclusion, ensuring that everyone is included. Can you speak to that?
Sure. I think the way he saw more of what could he do. He sought out what he could do. And I've got 4 brothers, and Wendell would show up to a family gathering and he'd be the first one to say, how can I help you? And she goes, I remember that, like nobody went like that. So he was always doing that, either whether it's in the home or in a meeting or a person on the street. How can I help you? Like if he could, he would. And he did.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
No, carry on. No, carry on, Melinda.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how he would see himself, I guess he just was so resourceful and took whatever he knew. I remember having conversations with him. I tell him, I don't know, a nugget of information. And then I'd see him going up on the podium to talk about something, and he would take that nugget I said and expand on it. And I was just like, how does he do it? He just incorporates. So he was always picking up from whoever, whether it be from Wasueg, myself, or, anybody. He was just thirsty for knowledge and willing to share it with everyone. And as far as disability, he wanted to make sure that people with disability were heard, not talked about, but talked to and talked with, sort of thing. Like, it was like nothing about us without us. So there are lots of people involved in disability advocacy, but he wanted to make sure that people in the community were heard. So be it, either the people themselves with a disability or parents of kids with disability. It was looking for different ways that he could get their voice amplified to ensure that they got services that they, it's kind of interesting that today we're meeting when and I'm just thinking of what happened yesterday with the settlement, where the Canadian government is going to pay, for the kids that were in care and that didn't receive, equitable treatment, or services. And he was about that. And that stemmed from Jordan Anderson, Jordan's principal, all of that. He was there and involved. He knew the people, he knew, and how, and he would have been so proud to see that happen, for that to be announced. It was just a good day. I think, well, he was very aware that kids in the community weren't getting the care they needed, the services they needed. So, sorry. And then the families would have to take their kids to, out of the community or out of their home. And so a lot of kids with disability were in care because of that reason. So he definitely had a stake in that, a role. Yeah, sorry.
Don't be sorry, Melinda, take your time. I think this is a very momentous time for Wendell, and I think it's very important that we're here today to be able to talk about his legacy and everything that was important to him. And like you said, he had a stake in that role. He had that advocacy. He wanted to step up and have that position for people that could not be able to have that voice for himself. So I think it's very momentous that this is what's taking place today, and he would be happy and he would be proud that this is what's happening. So in addition to all Wendell's work, I think it's important I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Wabanaki Council. And I know that he was instrumental in forming this organization of Wabanaki in the community. And he often would have this saying, like you said, nothing without us about us. But also he talked about from isolation to self-determination, and determined to have a position and determined to have a voice. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, he saw disability issues in everything. So if you're going to have a talk about housing, he wanted to talk about how people with disability were affected. If you were talking about education, how do people with disability, is there, accommodations or, how does that fit? I mean, everything any subject he would always tie it to, and it should be. And And it was really important that if it affected you, then you should speak up, or, you know, or let somebody know so that they can speak on your behalf, not on your behalf, like, you know, with you, sort of thing, not as opposed to for you. And so he had this, and he started out in social work, and then he moved into health. And so when he worked with, but he wore many hats all the time. And when he worked with AFM, that allowed him to have the national kind of perspective. And he was tying his network, he was expanding his network. And so that's how he ended up getting connections across the country about disability issues. And so he thought it was important to start the Wabanaki Council on Disability. That's for the East Coast, for the Mi'kmaq and the Wolastoq in New Brunswick, PEI, primarily those, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, and so I mean, there was a confederacy, Wabanaki Confederacy, way back like 200-300 years ago, and so it was, for him, it was bringing these issues under one umbrella group, and that's how he was able to to put this council together. And then he was able to go and lobby government for change. And so he was involved with like the Canada Revenue Agency, and on behalf of the Wabanaki Disability Group. And there was a number of people in there, but I think he was the only Indigenous one. So there was doctors and different people that were on that, and they were looking at how taxation system affects people with disability. And for him, it was people with disability who happened to be Indigenous. So he was just able to use both his connections and his ability to write a letter, or ability to understand big picture, how things worked and how things could be changed.
Thank you for sharing that, Melinda. I'm thinking about, you started off with talking about how Wendell would see these different social determinants of health in almost everything that surrounded him. So we're talking about poverty, we're talking about homelessness, we're talking about unemployment, all these different issues that Wendell would see disability in. So not only are we talking about a disability, we're talking about all these social determinants of health, where it places Indigenous people at the bottom of, basically, if we're looking on a spectrum, they're at the bottom of the spectrum. So not only do we have the disability, we have the poor social determinants of health. Do you think with that creates more challenges for Wendell as the only Indigenous person on Wabanaki Council? Like, how was he able to position himself, or even yourself today within the community, when we see people with disabilities, and then we see our statistics within our communities? We know we have a high number of people living in poverty or homelessness and all these different other social determinants of health that we have. Like, how do we see our way through that if we have these poor determinants, and then we have a disability on top of that?
So the Wabanaki Disability Council was, so that's for the Mi'kmaq Maliseet, so the Wolastoq people. He sat on different committees, national committees, and then one of them was a CRA committee. And that's where I said, I think he was the only Indigenous person there. But I think it was just, the way he just, he saw a need, and if he could fill it, he would. And I don't know. I mean, it was just, I don't know. Maybe you'd have to ask me the question again. I'm just getting
in a nutshell, what I'm looking at is that as Indigenous people, I feel like we have all these challenges to begin with. Like, we have challenges in regards to like the gaps of homelessness, poverty, unemployment. These are already existing challenges we have as Indigenous people. But if we're a person that's living with disability, and then we also have a community, regardless of where we are, if we're in community, urban centers, rural centers, we have a disability. What about the supports and services? Like, we can't even get proper housing. And now we have a person with disability. How are we to navigate these different challenges?
Yeah, I think the way he was doing it, I mean, when he thought of putting this together, I don't think he was by himself. He had other people with him, but data. I think data was the most important thing. Like, we have to do a study. We have to prove that, you know, how things are different and how things can change. But, you know, doing their own studies as opposed to somebody coming in and having their own preconceived notions on what, oh, you need this type of house. Well, how about asking the person what kind of house that they want, what they need, as opposed to just, you know, like, here, you can take apartment number 4. So he was very much about hearing from the person that was affected. And so if you have, instead of just a generic group that might not understand the realities of the impacts of colonialism and assimilation and all of that, then it's, you know, you're not going to hear exactly what the person needs. And sometimes you need that holistic background in order to really meet the needs of a person with disability on reserve, off reserve.
Yeah, thank you, Melinda. That's really important. You really have to understand the actual social problem that's happening in order to meet the needs. But on top of that, if you are a person living with a disability, it's even more challenging to be able to access those services. Like you said, for housing as an example, it's not, you can't just put anybody in a home. If you're living with a disability, we have to make sure that it's for us, about us, exactly how Wendell was approaching his life in regards to looking at inclusion and the determination to be able to move forward. So it's important. And so what I want to do is basically for the audience, I want them to know that I did interview Wasueg and Melinda earlier, probably within the last month, and we talked about letter writing. And Melinda has mentioned it a few times, and it's important to know that Wendell was known. I was talking with the late Joanne Francis, who I see Professor Roy Haynes on right now. And so I think it's important that part of this discussion came forward with the prompting of Professor Roy Haynes, who knew both Joanne and Wendell very well in the disability activist movement. So I think it's important to recognize that. But at the same time, when we're looking at letter writing, the significance of that is when I was talking with late Joanne's family, Lynn, her sister, and Mia, her niece, they were talking about Wendell and how every time they received a phone call or something had to happen, and Wendell was in Akwesasne because that's where Joanne lived. Every time there was a concern, they say, oh yeah, Wendell would grab his briefcase and we'd hop in the car and he'd be in the back of the seat and he'd be writing away. So he ended up getting this nickname of Wendell write a letter, Wendell write a letter. And so there's a significance to that because I know that Melinda has mentioned that several times. So I think that's important. And what's more important is that when Wendell's writing these letters of people coming from a position of someone with a disability, it really speaks to the advocacy of his determination to ensure that Indigenous peoples had a voice and they were situated where we need to basically say that so it's not about us. You can't do something without us you can't do it about us without us. So ensuring that he had a stake in these conversations. I'll have one more question for you, Melinda, and then what I'll do is I'll give the audience an opportunity to ask you some questions because I don't want to feel like we are grilling you, but this information is incredibly important for us, especially for the topic today. So I appreciate you giving us the time here. My last question is, as an Indigenous person, I know that myself personally, as a social worker, I do a lot of advocacy in the community, and I can comfortably say that I don't hear a lot about people with disabilities. And I don't know what it's like in your community or communities that we're surrounded. Is it because I am missing the boat, or am I in these wrong spaces, or do you hear a lot about people with disabilities? And if you do, what is it that we're hearing about people with disabilities?
No, you're right. I haven't heard from other people that have taken up Wendell's work. I chose not to be part of the Wabanaki Council. That was his thing, and I did my thing. I know some people in the community and in Tobic, they've almost like split it up. Like somebody would deal with it in housing and somebody else can deal with it in social. And so it was, I mean, what he was doing was he was doing it all before. So now there are some people that are taking on parts of it. There are somebody they've continued the council, but I haven't. I see some posts on Facebook, but I haven't really engaged with anybody on it. I'm learning to kind of to see to. I was happy to observe him, but now I realize, and I'm like, I'm learning stuff that I think I need to start voicing, but I'm not about to step on toes of anybody else. So I will stick to, right now I'm dealing with governance in our community. And so that takes into account how we governed ourselves prior to the Indian Act, what happened with the Indian Act, and where we're going to go forward with it as we, step away from the Indian Act. And I am very aware of, how everybody needs to be heard. People with disability, women, youth, everything. So I kind of just take that, I guess. I don't, like I said, I haven't heard that much. I mean, maybe like health. Yeah, here in our community of Listigish, they do have services, and Jordan's principle seems to be more catching what gets missed, I guess, through Health Canada now. But and I'm hoping changes will happen with with the decision, when they were talking about the kids in care, recognizing that they didn't get the services that they that everybody else in Canada was eligible for. There was how they fell through the cracks. So hopefully that's going to happen, and maybe Wasueg will take it upon herself. I mean, it takes time, and that would be definitely something else if Wasueg could be part of the force that makes sure that these gaps are addressed.
Thank you, Melinda. So, Wasueg, this would be my last question for you as well. Mom provides like the platform and the stage to carry on to the next question in regards to looking at being the force behind Dad's legacy of people with disabilities. When we're looking at people with disabilities, sometimes there could be some stigma, some discrimination, or basically the unknown. For yourself as a young person, do you see that there may be some stigma or discrimination, or maybe it's an uncomfortable conversation for people to have? Because if we don't have our communities talking about people with disabilities or disabilities itself, how can we ensure that the voice is there for people with disabilities? How can we open up that stage? Do you think you could be part of that?
I've talked to people who have found out that I'm Native, and just from that they've gotten uncomfortable talking to me. I've suffered so much like discrimination just for being Native, and I can't imagine how much discrimination my dad had to push through to be Indigenous and have a disability, and to fight for his rights, and then to fight for all Indigenous people and all of their rights, and everybody with a disability to fight for all of their rights also. And so I can't imagine how much racism that he had to push through, and how many people were not okay with what he was doing. And there is a lot of stigma around just Indigenous people speaking up in general. But I think that if we keep pushing forward and we keep fighting for what we think is right for our people, then I think it can get somewhere. It is getting somewhere, like my mom had talked about with the system and the kids who weren't getting what they necessarily needed in the system. They did stuff with that, and I think that they're going to be able to do more stuff as long as we keep carrying on the work that my dad had done. So I think that it can definitely go places, and it has gone places pretty far. And I'm very proud of my dad and what he did and what he got to accomplish. And I'm proud of myself for wanting to step into that activism that he had done. And I'm definitely going to keep pushing through the work that he did.
Thank you, Wasueg. And we are incredibly proud of you as well to be able to step forward and carry on with Dad's advocacy and the work that he's doing. And more importantly, the work that you need to do in the community for yourself as a young person. So we appreciate all the work that you're doing. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Ryan.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you to all of you. We'd like to invite contributions and questions from the audience now. I'd ask, I'm just going to I'll call on each person just so we don't all talk at once, reasonable audience size. But if you go down to your reactions in Zoom, you can use the hand raise function and just to put people in order. Or if you prefer not to speak, feel free to type out your question in the chat and I'd be happy to read it out for you. And I usually start ahead, to give people some time. I'll start if that's all right. I'm wondering about the assembly. We brought up dealing with organizations. How whenever you're dealing with a system, there's systems can always have barriers in them. And I wonder, Wendell did so much with the Assembly of First Nations. I have no idea what their accessibility concerns were like, either when he started or later. Was he part of any changes to the way that organization or any of the organizations he worked with approached accessibility?
For sure. He definitely he worked the room. So the Assembly of First Nations got together for a Special Chiefs Assembly in December, and they had an annual meeting in July. And so he would planes, trains, and automobiles to get there. And I mean, he didn't drive, so he made sure he was in the room. He made sure that people were going to address issues of importance to him and other people with disability. And so he would draft resolutions and made sure that he had support for them and made sure they got to the floor and were discussed. And sometimes they had a really charged agenda and you know, it didn't happen, but he did his utmost to make sure that, you know, he would do everything in his power to make sure it did. So yeah, he was always educating people. If a chief, and so sometimes he wouldn't be able to go. So the Assembly of First Nations represents the chiefs from across Canada. He wasn't a chief, so he would get either a proxy or convince a chief that they needed to go and, you know, put forth his resolution. So just being resourceful and being willing to talk to anybody and everybody in order to get the resolution passed to ensure that the disability file continued move forward. So he had started, when I first met him, it was 1994, and he was working with the Assembly of First Nations in health. He was organizing a national health conference, and I just saw him there, how he was able to take any opportunity, whether it be in the hall where a meeting would be taking place, or standing in line for dinner, or sitting down for, supper, and he sees somebody, I got to go talk to this person. I got to make sure that they know that, if they could help him or help the issue, he'd be working it. He was just like that. I mean, very likable and very intelligent and very talkative. Yeah, just not too much though. I mean, he was very and he was very much about process and respect and following following protocol. So anyhow, he just knew if you wanted to get there, then he would have to figure out how he was going to get there. So very methodical about it, and very convincing.
I should have added as well. I realize for some people, the raise hand function can pose an accessibility barrier. If that's true, of course, just start talking. That would be fine as well.
So I do have pictures if you wanted to see some of the, I mean, I don't even know where to start. I could start with this one. Wendell Nicholas for chief. Wasueg was just a baby. We moved back to Tobic and he wanted to run for chief. But before he did, he made sure that people knew him, because he had lived in Ottawa, Fredericton. He was, all over the place, and always coming back to the community, but not everybody knew him. So anyhow, he was on council for 2 years, and then he was and then he was going to run for chief again, but for health reasons, he decided not to. But he still continued his advocacy, but he did it in a different way. And so this picture, it was him with Wilton Littlechild. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, can you put it closer, Melinda? Yep. Oh yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So he was a mentor for Wendell for work that he did at the United Nations. And so Wendell too saw Canada was seen as a leader, not just for disability, not just for Canadians or Indigenous people of Canada. I mean, Indigenous people from around the world looked at Canada and their role at the United Nations to push for their rights to be recognized in their country, in their respective countries. So he was just trying to work every level, whether it be in the community, whether it be in the region with the Wabanaki Disability Council, AFN with their wide network, or at the UN. So he just spoke up whenever and wherever he felt he needed to.
Dominique, please go ahead.
Thank you so very much. I could watch your pictures forever. So when there is a lull, please continue. But I would really like Roy Haynes, who talked to this project first about the marvelous work that Wendell was doing, maybe to come in, Roy, because Roy was one of the founder of our research group, and it was very important to him that we celebrated the work of Wendell.
I was hoping April Doban would speak first, but it was as her capacity of Council of Canadians with Disabilities. First of all, it's an honor to be here and to be with members of Wendell's family, and I thank you, Melinda and Wasueg, about your wonderful discussions and beautiful interview. Some points have been made, and I met Wendell probably around the same time as Melinda did in 1994. And it's not that we worked a lot together, but we worked closely together at times. And I was thinking about this presentation in a few words, and it's come up. And what I learned from Wendell were a few things. First of all, there's been a lot of discussion about the struggles for Indigenous peoples and disabled peoples in this country over the years. And the magic of Wendell was when in my feeling about Wendell and his work with Indigenous communities and the AFN and governments was to talk about disability, stigma, disability issues. And with the Council of Canadians and our work and others at an international level, he would point out where disabled people's organizations were missing the discussion, the important discussion of Indigenous peoples. I have to make a couple of points here, and I was realizing that Wendell may have been the first Indigenous, or amongst the first Indigenous peoples, to speak to a group of social work students about disability. And he and Joanne Francis, because my course was the first of its kind at the time in 1994 in Canada. So he came to my class to teach. And I didn't know Wendell, but I knew Joanne quite well, because Joanne was a student who I supervised when she was doing a community service degree in rehabilitation medicine. And then Joanne became the social worker for the Canadian Paraplegics Association. So I knew her quite well. But it's interesting because it's been mentioned that Wendell didn't talk about disability, about being a disabled person, but he did inform the class about colonization. And he said, disability is a word of colonization. He said, in my language, in my culture, and Joanne said the same thing, there is no word for disability. It's not evident. It comes later. And so when he was asked what he said, he used the term, he said, but disability was one of many characteristics of the person. It wasn't the defining characteristic of the person, but it was one of many. And so that's often why I think he didn't use that term. Other things have been also spoken about Wendell, and I found too, he had quite a little sense of humor. And I remember him teasing Joanne in classes when they presented, and about ancestors. And he said, your ancestors were pretty tough, Joanne. He said, mine were very peaceful people, and so they would have these discussions. And whenever we're together, it was very similar. The unfortunate thing is that we weren't together enough, and both passed far, far too young. One of the other things that I always knew about Wendell was the respect. Not only the respect he had for people, like he had a lot of respect for the students he was sharing knowledge with, and that's how he approached it. But he also got a lot of respect back through his very quiet demeanor. And I think at that time, I might be wrong, but I think he was just starting the Wabanaki Council. And unfortunately, I think I misplaced his card. I had it in my office and with me for like 30 some years. But other times, as I said, is that working with Wendell, it was through when I was part of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities Social Policy Committee. He would. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. And I remember the meetings about how
Roy, Melinda was showing you the card of Wendell.
Oh,
on a camera.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. I have to find. But we were asked to go to a meeting, and April may be able to comment on it more. And I saw Wendell there, and so we started chit chat. So he and I ended up in the same group. But it was quite interesting how he would listen and listen, and then he wouldn't take notes. He would just summarize so succinctly what needed to be said. And we were critiquing a document for, I think, part of a presentation to the UN. And he just kind of summarized our whole discussion in a very warm and polite way. But I never did see him take a note, but I do remember that. And one of the things that I think that has to be mentioned here about thanking you for speaking about Wendell is that the opportunity was missed by the federal government 30 years ago to do this. And so I thank Dominic and others for doing this. Met with representatives of the federal government years ago, and in the 1990s, and they wanted to know if we could, it was Council of Canadians and a group, what they could get funding. And one of the things they advocated for was to interview activists, get the story down. And unfortunately, Wendell has passed, Joanne Francis has passed. This week, we in the disability community lost another advocate, Steve Esty, and other leaders have passed, Henry Ann's and others. But when you say Wendell and Joanne's name in that realm of people, for you who may or may not know them, we're talking about world-class people, world-class disability advocates, and I think that's all. I will always remember Wendell about that. He was a world-class act, and for me, a real gentleman and a gentle spirit. And thank you for your words and your presentation.
I've got a picture from 1994.
Yeah. Look at that.
Yeah,
He
there
was
was
wise. He was wise beyond his years. I didn't notice 1994. Look at
yeah.
that.
I told him that he was an old soul when I first met him, and I
Yes.
thought he was 40 years old as opposed to 27.
You know, he looked younger. He was wise beyond his years. And when he came to my class, the first class, I'm telling you, you know, I was just beginning as a professor, and I said, I hope these two don't have to take a bathroom break or something, because all the students are going with them and they're not coming back. There's Wendell.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miigwech. I really appreciate being part of this discussion.
And this is not him. This is Billy Two Rivers, and this is Prime Minister Paul Martin. And so Wendell take advantage of any situation to kind of talk to people. And I remember we were traveling from Montreal to we were traveling from Montreal to Ottawa. We stopped at Tim Hortons, and the bus that was it was during election time, and one of the, what was his name, Stéphane Dion,
Yes,
went to the washroom, and Wendell waited outside the washroom just to get to talk to him. And like, oh, can you make sure, you know, and I'll talk to your people, sort of thing. He just took it, you know, like took a chance. And you know, what's the worst people can say is no. And you know, so what he did, he went with Billy and Billy Two Rivers, and they it was Canada Day, and people were getting sworn their citizenship. And so he and Billy got involved at the Parliament to, you know, and people wanted to take a picture with him, and Wendell's taking a picture, like he couldn't even see me, but anyhow, he was like, yeah, take a picture. And so anyhow, I was just saying, he just was just, you know, yeah, he moved in so many circles, and he was world class in so many ways.
One side, if you wouldn't mind commenting on, because we're talking about his disability. When I last spoke to Wendell, he was saying, Roy, I'm doing less than this. And he said, I'm getting into the fishing business. Did he pursue that, doing fishing?
That was when he was on council. So he was and so he was fishery.
He was a fisheries person.
That was his portfolio hold. He was a portfolio holder for fisheries, and
he really developed that for Toba community, didn't he?
The time that he was there, yes, he did. He negotiated deals with the people on the dock, with the fishermen, and he was he came up with a scheme. Well, I wouldn't say a scheme. It was a process where they would pay back for the debts of the previous I don't know persons involved, sort of thing, on behalf of the band. And people like, are you, why would you do that? And then they turned back, I think maybe about a year later, like, that was genius, you know. It was just to get the buy-in from the fishermen that were non-Indigenous,
Yeah.
it's like, listen, we want to pay our debts, we want to be involved, we want to do this peacefully. So yeah, he didn't just stop at disability issues. He
No,
was
no.
he was doing a lot. Yeah, but that's
But
how
that's
he was
the
involved
way,
with fisheries.
yeah, that's the way he was. That's
Yeah,
the way.
yeah,
Thank you again.
yeah. You're welcome.
If I'm right, April has a question.
Uh, Thank you, Brian. Don't really have a question, but I just wanted to say how much the presentations have resonated with me and really, reminded me of the Wendell that I came to know through my work at the Council of Canadians with Disabilities. Um, Back in the early days of the National Aboriginal Network on Disability, which I believe Wendell was very much involved in, representatives came to our council table to discuss how our organization in the cross-disability movement might want to work with Indigenous people with disabilities. And he really, as I recall, really always stressed about how there were like different structures in the Indigenous community, and that we needed to work respectfully with those structures. And Wendell really, for me, always exemplified respect in action. And that's how he related to our organization and all the people that he came into contact at the meetings that I was at. And over the years, I had the opportunity to work with Doreen Demas, another Indigenous leader with disability who has also passed. And so I sometimes would travel with her as her guide. So I had the opportunity to observe Wendell working in various meetings that I attended along with Doreen. And like Roy has said, Wendell could always summarize the proceedings in the most eloquent manner without any notes. I'm sort of known for the person who writes everything down, but Wendell never had to do that. He could just do amazing summaries just from what he had heard. And so I really appreciate that that this work is being done so that other people will have the opportunity to learn from the lessons that Wendell taught us all. So I just wanted to share those comments with the group.
Thank you.
Thank you, April.
Thank you. I'd really appreciate learning more about where Wendell made his mark, and you're telling, and I appreciate you telling us about the passing of Doreen Demas. I didn't realize that, so I'm really surprised, and I'd like to express my condolences to you.
Thank you. It was very sad that Doreen has passed so early. She, like Wendell, made a huge contribution. And like you say, Wendell made a big contribution in the cross-disability rights movement. He was there, at our meetings when we discussed the community input to on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, when we were advising the people who were going to be on the Canadian delegation, what the community, thought should be in the CRPD. Wendell attended a lot of those meetings and shared from his perspective how issues should be addressed. So he had a big impact on the mainstream, the cross disability rights movement in Canada.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing, April. I appreciate that.
Melinda, you said that accessibility was Wendell's thing and you had your thing, which sounds healthy for any relationship. But I'd say this crew's interested in both. Could you tell us about some of your work with governance?
I could tell you.
You don't have to.
When we were married, we decided that one of us was going to be home with kids. So, I mean, our son Taylor's 33, Wasueg 16. It was like having two single children. Anyhow, I supported his work, and it took him away from the home half the time, I would say, maybe even 3 weeks sometimes, like on the regular. And so I was okay being the supportive person in our marriage. Like his work, I saw that it was important. When I met him, I was going to law school, and I wasn't sure if that was for me, and I left it for a bit, and he promised my mother, I promise she's going to go back, and so I did. And he was supportive in that for me. And when I went actually to work, I tried different things, and some of it was with federal government, and that wasn't working with me in the sense of I needed to express myself as an Indigenous person, and I didn't find my spot there. This was Environment Canada and in different places, but I ended up working with the James Bay Cree, so the Cree of Northern Quebec, and for me, I took that particular position, that job, and I did for about 10 years, was economic development and social economic development for the most part. And so it was a small team, so we got to do a lot of different things. After he passed, we decided to move back to the community, and it was more, I saw it as a way to ground both, my son and Wasueg, in community, in with their relationships with my side of the family, because we spent a lot of time in Tobic, so this was different to come here to Listugush and have that, and just to get back with the land. And so now my son's a fisherman, and he's going hunting this weekend, and hopefully gets his moose, cross fingers. But that was something that I think he would have supported. I know we had moved to Tobic for a couple of years when Wasueg was a baby. She doesn't remember that so much, but it was just supporting each other. That was in whatever we did. So this governance that I'm talking about now, I feel like everything I've done kind of brought me to this point. And so I'm the coordinator for a governance symposium that's going to take place in a couple of weeks. And we're making sure that culture's involved. We're making sure that we're following protocol. We're making sure that we tap all the resources we can. And I was like, this is how Wendell would have done it. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Put you on the spot there. So thank you very much.
That's right.
All right. If there are no other questions, Anne, is there anything else you'd like to end off with before I do the close off? Oh,
Dominique has a question.
Dominique, yeah.
I've got a question. Just I think as I want to see more pictures, Melinda and Wasueg. You did speak of the importance of your family, like how you're trying to continue the work of Wendell, but also of the family before you, the Wendell's parents and your parents, and the support that you all gave to each other, and the story of Wendell's mom's deciding, no, not an external school, which was the kind of decisions that many parents with people of children who had a disability had to make, but to try to put all the energies they had to make sure that Wendell was raised on the spot. All this is, I find it very interesting, and maybe then I could even call on Sandy, who worked on these questions of parents of people who were deaf and children who were deaf, and these very crucial decisions, because very often also Native Indigenous people live away from these big institutions, so it's a lot of distance as well to have access to these services. So I think you have pictures of when he was little and his family, and you say his mom supported him. That's
See that
nice.
one? I think he was about 2 or 3 years old there.
Yeah, it's super cute.
Where's another one?
And his mom
when
was a teacher, wasn't she, Melinda, if I'm right? Or
she was a social worker.
social
She-
worker.
Yeah,
Okay.
for kids that were being placed into adoptive homes in Nebraska. That was where she spent a good chunk of her time. She had remarried somebody in the military, and anyhow, that's how they ended up in Nebraska. This was, you see him in the background.
Yes.
He was chosen. He was going to high school. So in order for him to get the best education, after he came back from England, he wasn't quite fitting in the community, and they wanted to make sure that he did. And then they sent him to Rothsay, Netherwood, a school in St. John. And so anyhow, they needed to find, they wanted an Indigenous child to meet the Pope. And this is who got to go on behalf of New Brunswick Indigenous people. Wendell got, I mean, he got to see so many people and do so many things. We called him Forrest Gump sometimes. You just never know where he was going to be, and he was going to be there in the picture, in the thick of things. This was him when he was in New Zealand, and that's Maka Tibble, who was Indigenous disability advocate for health in New Zealand. So yeah, he and Maka had a really good relationship, and I think Maka was the president of the World Blind Union, and I think Wendell was somehow, I'm not sure if he was vice president. I think he was, but maybe he just sat on the World Blind Union. These were two peas in a pod. I mean, I think Wendell was, serious in a lot of ways, but this was just, he was just a kid who wanted to be just like his dad. And his dad was the one who was chief of his community and who went to England to make sure that Indigenous people's rights were protected before they brought the Constitution back. And Section 35 shows, it was a culmination of a lot of people's efforts to make sure that Indigenous rights were recognized and affirmed. This is his picture in the hospital. So these are his siblings. I think it was first time we had them together all. So his sisters and his niece, nephew, and Wasueg and I. And that was something else. I think that was the first time. So we were living in the South Shore of Montreal, and he was in the hospital because he had an infection in his foot that he didn't feel, and likely because of neuropathy, and his foot was amputated. And this was after one of the operations, like maybe, I don't know, a week or two after the operation. And his sisters came to sing, and it was just a good moment. And so, yeah, they played oh, I don't know who was playing the drum. I think it was Becca. Anyhow, they played a drum and they sang. Oh no, it was Edward. Anyhow, it was really for something for him. He was both. I showed you the picture of him at the this one for meeting the Pope, but he was also he had a foot in two worlds. Like he was he was a Catholic who went to sweats. That's what he would tell people. So he wore a lot of hats, and that was just him. It was just, he could be comfortable anywhere. But he was still very much, raised in Catholicism, but believed in native spirituality. And for them at the hospital, they were taken aback about the ceremony. I mean, the singing for him and the drums. So, I mean, that's it. I got a lot of pictures, but we can end there. Yeah.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Melinda. Thank you, Wasueg, for sharing with us. I appreciate you and your humility, the bravery, and the courage to come forward to talk about Wendell. I know that it's a great honor for us to be able to learn about his legacy and the work moving forward with Wasueg and the advocacy that you're doing for Indigenous peoples. I don't have any question. It's just a comment. I did work with Wendell, and for me, what is really an honor is that the last time I met Wendell and Melinda, we were at a conference, and Melinda had taken a picture of Wendell and I forget who the other person was, Melinda.
Noel Starblanket.
Noel Starblanket.
Yeah, he was the president of the National Indian Brotherhood back in I think it was the 80s, and his father was the vice president, and the National Indian Brotherhood was the organization before it became AFN.
Yeah. So before that, when I first met Wendell, it was at AFN and working within the community. And the thing that I really admire about Wendell is that I did not know he was a person with disability. I did not know that he was legally blind and was not able to really connect and see me. And here we are having these dynamic conversations. He's all over the place, and it's like, wow. So if there's anything that I take away is the admiration that I have for Wendell and everything that he's left behind in regards to his legacy of people with disabilities and moving forward. So I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us, Melinda and Wasueg. So with that, I will pass it back to Ryan, our host. Well, Ellen.
All right, I guess that brings us to the end of our time. It's been a great session. Thank you again to our speakers. Thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Wasueg. Thank you, Ann. And thank you all for taking the time to come and participate. Dominique has posted a link in the chat to the Oral Histories of the Disability Rights Movement project, which features both Melinda and Wasueg and Roy. Our next event is on November 2nd, when Dominique and Hollis Pierce will explore the history and future of disability advocacy in the nation's capital. It's an Ottawa history of advocacy. This will be hosted online at the Bytown Museum. So we hope to see many of you again. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having us.